What's up, everybody? Coach Daisha here, bringing you this week's hot topic. This time around, I want to do a quick overview of one of the landmark research studies that has been done on high intensity training and its effect on bone mineral density. And you probably already have heard of this study if you're on this channel, and that study is the LIFTMOR study. I get a lot of questions surrounding this particular research study and the findings that came out of it. But one of the main questions I get is the movements themselves and this whole concept of high intensity training. So I simply want to take this video to break down the study just a little bit and then give you my 2 cents when it comes to what high intensity training really means and what that can look like for you in your own journey to improving your bone health. So let's get started. All right, so let's go over the details of this study. First things first, this study was conducted on 101, so pretty large group of participants in this study, postmenopausal women who either identified with osteopenia or osteoporosis. And those numbers were determined at the beginning of the study. And then, of course, other imaging and numbers were done at the conclusion of the study as well. So what they did is they took those women and they divided them into two groups. You had your control group, and then you had the exercise or the what they call the high risk group. The control group, which was about 49 of the ladies, these ladies basically just did an at-home program that was very, very low impact, low intensity. They did not do anything with heavy lifting. A lot of their movements actually did not include weights at all. They did some walking, some light stretching, etc. Their particular protocol was 2, maybe 3 times a week for about 30 minutes at a time. So basically a very easy at-home program. Then you had your high risk group. We call them high risk because this was the high intensity resistance training group. They also included an impact move. These ladies, which was about 50 something or however many were left, whatever the math is on that, these ladies did twice a week sessions. They did what is considered high intensity training, meaning they did 3 different lifts plus an impact move. The 3 lifts that they did were a barbell squat, an overhead press, and deadlift. At the beginning of the study, these ladies were all tested to find out what their 1 rep max was. After their 1 rep max was determined, they then did, for those 3 movements, they did 80 to 85% of their 1 rep max. And they did that for 5 repetitions, 5 sets. All right. That protocol was used for all 3 of the strength movements. That same protocol as far as 5 repetitions and 5 sets was also done for their impact movement. And the impact movement that they chose for this study was a jumping chin up, letting go, and into what we call a hanging drop. Okay, so they jumped up onto like a pull-up bar into like a chin-up position, let go of that bar, landed on the ground. All right, so they call it the high risk group because high intensity resistance plus impact training. That was that group. Once again, each one of these groups were tested ahead of time to get their T-scores at the beginning, and then they were tested again at the end. Everybody went through 8 months of their particular protocol. The findings were massive. They found that the control group that did their at-home, very low intensity, very low impact, hardly any weightlifting sessions, those women actually lost bone mineral density, and everything was tested at the hips and the femoral neck. I'm sorry, at the lumbar spine and the femoral neck. They lost almost 2% of bone mineral density, okay? Which we kind of assumed would happen anyway, because as we age, we are always we're losing bone mineral density anyway, just simply by being on this planet longer. So that was the control group. However, in the high risk group, so our group that was doing 2 sessions per week for these 8 months, doing these very heavy lifts plus that impact movement, they actually saw upwards of 2%, almost 3% increases at the femoral neck and in the lumbar spine. Very statistically significant, as we call it when it comes to research. So there was a huge jump there, which is hard to find. once again, just being on this planet longer, we are going to gradually lose bone mineral density. So the fact that these people not only maintained, but actually improved their bone mineral density was probably the biggest eye opener when it comes to the results of this study. So as you can see, this study really showed some vast improvements in bone mineral density for a group of people that a lot of times we don't assume that that's going to be the case. These ladies, once again, postmenopausal, all had either osteopenia or osteoporosis. You just assume that we're not going to see these massive gains. So when people find this study, a lot of the patients and clients I deal with, their first thing that they ask is, am I supposed to be doing those lifts? And my answer to them is no, not right now. If you're asking me that question, there's a pretty good chance that you're probably not already strength training. These people not only already had a baseline when it came to their fitness level, but they were also highly monitored during their sessions. So we were making sure that these people were having proper form and technique the entire time, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a very structured and very well monitored research study as far as making sure that people were not going to injure themselves doing these moves. Having to do 80 to 85% of your one rep max is something that most of us cannot do out the gate. It is something that you can progress to, but if you are a newbie to strength training, no. The actual movements and how much they were actually lifting in this LIFTMOR study is not going to be applicable to you. So then the other question I get is, what does it mean, this high intensity training? Am I supposed to be lifting really fast, really hard, etc.? When we use the term high intensity in this case with this particular study, it's considered high intensity because of the load, because of the amount of weight that these women were lifting. Once again, it was 80 to 85% of their one rep max. That is large. Because it is such a large amount of weight, we can consider that high intensity. Also, the impact move that they chose, that hanging drop where they let go from the pull-up bar and then landed, the impact there can be somewhere between 3 to 5 times somebody's body weight in ground reaction force. And from other studies, we know that that type of ground reaction force has a positive influence on bone mineral density. So with all of those factors combined, you can consider this particular protocol high intensity. What happens though is we have a lot of people who confuse high intensity with cardiovascular moves. They assume that whenever they hear high intensity, that means that they've got to do a lot of running, a lot of jumping, etc. Something that's cardiovascular that gets their heart rate up. The heart rate going up is true, but that doesn't always have to happen with cardiovascular moves. If you're lifting a heavy weight, believe me, your heart rate's going to get up. And because it's challenging to your muscles and your bones, that is where we can consider this particular protocol high intensity. Now, all of this to say, the LIFTMOR study gave us some extremely great data as far as what types of movements to do and the fact that it's so important to progress our training. We don't want to stay in the lightweight range forever. We want to make sure that our weight training is progressing. However, what it's also done is set up a lot of people to believe that that is the hallmark, that we have to get there. You've got to get to a barbell squat or a barbell deadlift. You've got to be able to press a barbell over your head, and you've got to be able to drop from a chin-up bar, and that's the only impact you can do. I need you to understand, just because those were the particular movements they did in this study, that doesn't have to be where you end up. It could be what you aim for, and it could even be what you keep in the back of your mind as far as what progressive training looks like. But the main goal here for anybody listening to this video, anybody wanting to improve their bone mineral density through fitness, you have got to use strength training, and it has to be in a progressive overload mentality. You start here, but you eventually, gradually increase your weights, increase your sessions or your reps, whatever it is over time. Impact, not for everybody, but if it is for you, if you can include impact, the same goes there. Make sure you start off with a foundation and gradually increase it over time. That's the main takeaway from this study. You don't necessarily have to do exactly what they did in the LIFTMOR study because everybody is different. So make sure that you always keep your particular situation in mind before you partake in any type of fitness routine. And that's it. I hope that this breakdown of the LIFTMOR study and how high intensity training can be incorporated into your routine was helpful. If you've got any questions or comments about that, feel free to put that in the comments below. Otherwise, I will see you next time for another hot topic.